Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of the ARC Payments Forum. For this session of Edgar, Dunn Company here. I'll start off by introducing myself in case none of you have been at the other sessions this week. My name is Jennifer Watkins. I'm Director of Payments at ARC. And my co-presenter for the ARC Payments Forum is Kevin Haag. He's the Manager of Payment Processing and Acceptance. Couple housekeeping items, virtual housekeeping. First of all, everyone is muted, but you will have 2 options for questions. One is to type in the question into your toolbar, and I will ask the question. And second is to raise your hand, and then Kevin will unmute you, and you'll be able to ask your question in person. Other interesting thing about this session is we're going to be doing a poll during the session, so you'll have to pay attention, and we're hoping that you'll participate in our poll, and Pascal will show the results. So I will move right on and introduce Pascal Burg. He is a director at Edgar, Dunn Company. He has over 20 years of experience in consulting for business strategy for both financial services companies and it's particularly in travel. And I think I've probably known Pascal close to those 20 years, between probably 15 and 20 years. So we're very excited to have him here. And so Pascal, I'll turn it over to you.
Jennifer, thanks a lot for inviting me to present today. So
you bet.
We've got a busy hour. I've got a few slides together, and basically what Jennifer asked us to do is to share with you what we see to be the impact of COVID-19 on payments, especially in the airline sector, and also identify some options, that airlines can consider as we come out of this crisis. So we've got about 5 sections to go through, quite a lot of slides. No need to take too many notes. We can share the slides with you after this presentation. And as Jennifer mentioned, there will be some poll questions. So that's a chance for you to respond to these polls, and at the end of each section, if you also want to ask us questions, please please do so. So what we'd like to talk about today is these 5 sections. So very quickly, for 5 minutes, just the impact, showing some numbers. Then we'll talk specifically about the airline sector, what we see the impact on the different stakeholders. By that we mean the travel agents, the airlines, the acquirers, the issuers, the payment networks. Some of the trends we're seeing as well, meaning some examples of what airlines are already starting to do to leverage payments as a way out of this crisis, and then some final thoughts about what are some options for you, and of course we'll be happy to talk about these options after this call if you want to have any offline discussions. So on the impact slides very quickly, but we thought it'd be useful just to have some lines. So even before looking at the airline industry, of course, you'll expect that COVID-19 will have a massive impact on growth and on GDP across all of the major economies. To be honest, no one knows the actual numbers. These were the numbers as of last week, that in countries like the US, GDP might go down by 6%, but it's guesswork, right? It's too early to tell. But basically, we know it's going to be a massive impact this year, and we hope that the economies in most countries will come back at least partially next year. Travel and transportation, again, that best than anyone, is one of the sectors that is most affected. So we don't need to repeat that, but basically it's been a severe impact on all aspects, right? Whether it's for your operations, your revenue, your supply chain. So needless to say, it has a major impact on travel. In terms of the card industry, it's a bit early to tell, but when you look at the forecast, we took here the countries like the US, China, and France, and these are the number of card transactions across all sectors, not just for airlines, but across all sectors. And the forecast is in most countries, it would still be maybe small growth or flat in terms of number of transactions this year, and then hoping that it picks up again starting next year. So I'm going through these slides very quickly. They're just here more in terms of background. What I guess may be more interesting are these 2 slides, and literally I've just added them today, to give you the latest out of the of the press. So this is for the US. is the US card spend, again, across all sectors, not just, airlines. But as you can see, the biggest decrease has been by end of March, and step by step, this is, spend on debit cards and credit cards in the US. And step by step, the spend is recovering, but we still, as of today, or sorry, I think it was yesterday, we're still about 28% below what was the card spend, before the crisis. So there's still some catching up to to do there. What I thought I'd show you as well, and I know most of you are very focused on the US market, but I thought I could share some numbers about the French market. Because we got out of lockdown a bit earlier, and sorry, some of the slides are in French. It's only this one. But if you look on the left-hand side, it's the same idea. It shows the card spend in France as a basis of 100 before the lockdown. And if you look at the end of March, to the worst it got, it was basically minus 50%. But what's interesting is the lockdown kind of finished in France on May 11. And you can see that within 4 weeks, basically up to last week, the card spend across all sectors has more or less got back to where it was before. It's gone back to within 1% of the base 100. So that could mean that actually, consumer really quickly. There's some interesting stats here on the right-hand side by an OTA called Mr. Fly in France. And what they're showing here is that basically what happened on Monday of this week, we had a political announcement by the French president about confirming that the intra-EU borders are opening up and that people can book hotels and can book flights again to travel within Europe. And what the OTA was showing is as soon as that announcement was made, literally that evening, the online traffic on the website doubled, and the booking levels compared to the previous week increased 240%. Now it's still way below last year's volume. It's about half of the booking that they had last year at the same time, but at least the curve, the uptake is looking very positive. So I think the message here is that the spend on cards, and including the spend on cards in travel, could actually pick up fairly fast if consumers have basic confidence and if there's some clear kind of political announcements and some easing of restrictions. So thought to share some what might be hopefully not perfect news, not completely good news, but positive news. So these are some numbers we wanted to share just very quickly to get the conversation going. So Kevin, let me maybe stop here. That was the first section.
This is Jennifer. I don't have any that have been typed in.
And nobody's raised their hand at this point, Pascal.
Okay, thank you. But that should be fairly clear, and most of you maybe knew that already, but just to give us the background, so we can spend more time on the other sections. So the next one is specifically about the airline sector. So here, the first slides I'm going to show here, again, these numbers change weekly, right? So I'm not going to spend, some of them are from ARC, from IATA, from other sources. It's more for you to have on one slide, right? So if you want to look, for instance, how much have governments provided in terms of financial aid to airlines by region, impact on flight ticket prices or on air cargo, at least you have some numbers. So I don't need to comment them. Of course, they're really bad numbers, right? In most cases, reductions compared to last year are, best case scenario minus 20, minus 30%, and worst case scenario might be, minus 95%. So we don't need to spend too much time here, except the good news is that in quite a few countries, there's been financial aid, provided, and that will hopefully ensure that, many carriers can survive this crisis. Looking forward, again, as I said earlier, no one has a crystal ball, but here I took a forecast that I guess maybe many of you have seen already, but it's the most recent one, hopefully from IATA, in terms of their forecast of how the sector will recover. And I think here the idea is that it's going to take at least a couple of years until we get back to where we were before COVID-19, and I yet assume that it's mostly going to be domestic that's going to get us to pull out of this crisis, and then later on international will pick up. So depending on the region and depending on your mix of domestic versus international, the hope is that by 2022 at the earliest or 23 at the latest, we'll go back to a level where we were in 2019. Now, this is overall spend. I think I will speak later on in this presentation in terms of the breakdown by payment method. That is likely to change, so we'll talk about that. But this is at the top line, your total revenues, and then later on we'll speak about what it means for card volumes, non-cards, alternative forms of payment, and so on. So that's what I wanted to share in that second section. So again, I don't know if there's any obvious question here straight away. I wanted to go through these first two sections quite fast because I see most of you are interested in the rest, which is much more focused on payment in the airline sector. But let me stop here again in case there's any questions.
Nothing that has been typed in.
Okay.
And no raised hands at this point.
Okay. Well, hopefully. Okay, thanks, Kevin. Well, hopefully it's all clear for everybody, and that gives us the the background to what we wanted to discuss. So where we can spend more time is, and I'll go a bit more slowly now, especially if my French accent is confusing, about the consequences we see on the stakeholders that are involved in payment in your sector. So the way we've done it here, we've got two slides where we try to say, okay, what's the impact in the short term versus the long term for each one of 6 stakeholders. So on this slide, we have the first 3, and then we have another slide. So when we speak to travel agents, of course, they've experienced the same decrease in bookings as airlines or hotels. So we just have a number here for booking.com, which just shows you how dramatic it's been for them as well. And what's top of mind, and again, I'm sure it's the same for most airlines, are all the issues they had around vouchers and chargebacks and refunds. Here we have an example, for instance, of how many cancellations last minute, for instance, had to deal with in some of the geographies they're involved in. So looking at long term for the travel agents, when we speak to them, they're telling us they're very focused on making sure that domestic or intra-regional bookings kicking off are restarting as early as they can, and we'll talk about later on some of the promotional offers or others that they are, or how they're looking at using payments. One way, now you could say this is not maybe new, but we definitely have a lot of more requests or interest around, kind of leverage new alternative forms of payment to really help kickstart sales, and a lot of interest around installment. Now, some of you do maybe installment in the US already, but maybe in some international markets you might not do it already, or you may be looking at it. So here it's kind of saying that that could really be seen as a way to help kickstart sales. And the other topic we're hearing from travel agents is a lot of interest in virtual cards as a way to pay out suppliers. This could be a way to pay out hotels, but it could be a way to pay out airlines as well. So that's why we put it in bold, because that's by talking to some of the large OTAs, they were maybe using virtual cards already before for payout, but we hear them being very willing to use that even more so. So later on, when we talk about it on the airline side, that clearly means that as an airline, you need to decide what your policy is going to be regarding this, these virtual cards. On the airline side, well, you're on the phone here, so I don't need to tell you the impact it's had on in the short term. Some of you, unfortunately, have been furloughed. There's been a small number, but some bankruptcies. What's interesting on the furlough side, though, we speak to some payment managers that tell us that for some airlines, they haven't been furloughed at all. To the opposite, we speak to some payment managers that have maybe never spoken so often to their CFOs or to their corporate treasurer, because of course cash is so important. So being able to understand relationship with acquirers, whether anything is changing in terms of settlement cycles and so on, means that actually some of you have been even busier than you could argue before. And when we talk to you about some long-term changes, and I'll keep that for later on, that's really the next section. Again, a lot of interest. We get a lot of questions about how do I do installment, with which provider, for which tickets. Are there maybe some alternative payment models I should be considering? And we put that in bold because I think that's a very interesting one, and we'll talk about that later on. It'd be great to get the feedback from the group, whether you see that as being really realistic or not. On the corporate side, meaning the corporate buyers, it's really hard to tell. We get a lot of questions about will leisure travel, pick up first, and people will use their corporate cards, or is it going to be mostly the corporations that will again start traveling and using their lodge accounts or their corporate cards? Here I just shared a stat from AirPlus. They did a survey where they get a sense that about half of the corporations will start traveling again in the near term. Again, to be honest, no one knows for sure. But what's for sure is when you talk to the travel managers on the corporate side, what's top of mind for them is definitely anything they can do to automate even more the payment processes and to obtain flexibility, right? Whether it's both the fares or the way they pay, or ensuring that refunds are done even using less manual work. That's definitely some top of mind comments we're getting from from travel managers. On the other stakeholders, when we talk to acquirers, of course, if I'm an acquirer, my concern is huge decrease in travel spend, so my revenue is going down, and on top of that, I'm concerned about my clients, my airlines, going bankrupt, because in that case, there's an exposure on the unflown tickets. In addition, acquirers have had increase in their operating expenses as well, right? Because they get involved in more exceptions, more chargebacks. They need to have their risk people, look at clauses, talk to airlines. And there's some concern around fraud as well, whether there might be some new fraud patterns, whether it's friendly fraud or just kind of organized crime that tries to leverage the fact that people are maybe furloughed, or that there's a bit of an operational mess to try to conduct fraud schemes. So that's the short-term issue. More long-term, we're definitely hearing acquirers that realize that maybe they did, or some of them, I'm not talking, it's hard to generalize. Some of them had pretty sophisticated risk management processes in place already, but some did not. We spoke to some acquirers that maybe only have a very small number of airlines, or only in the domestic market, and maybe to, for instance, quantify the risk exposure, they use some very basic averages, and by doing that, either they were overstating the risk and therefore asking maybe you could say too much or too many guarantees from the airlines. On the flip side, maybe they were not protected enough, and then they can get into this knee-jerk reaction of talking to airlines in a crisis mode, and these conversations typically are not very nice conversations. So that's been definitely a focus for some of the acquirers to improve going forward their risk management approach, and especially to quantify the risk exposure that they have with airlines properly, and then to find a way to mitigate that risk that is not too detrimental to the airline's business. The second point is some of the incumbents, which is common sense, right, might either reduce the exposure by maybe limiting the acquiring volume that they get from airlines, or some of them might be potentially even exiting this sector. The flip side is we're starting to hear new entrants might be interested in looking at the airline sector. Now, of course, when they either they call us, or I know they've been calling some of you maybe on this webinar already. The reaction we get is typically, okay, as an acquirer, I might do, for instance, e-commerce acquiring, and I know what I'm doing there. Airline sector is very different. I might not know it, but maybe there's some market share to be taken. And if I do that, I need to make sure, of course, that I do it in a sensible manner. And maybe I do it by leveraging escrow accounts. So maybe I come in as an acquirer, and I might use an escrow, either myself or a third party, to hold the funds in escrow. And we'll talk about that later on And here there's some acquirers, like SafeCharge or others, that might be considered new entrants. So I think that's a trend to watch to see what's going to happen there. On the issuer side, of course, for the issuers, especially the issuers that have a co-brand card, it's been a massive impact, right? Travel is a huge part of card spend, especially credit card spend, and even more so of airline co-brand card spend. So that's a massive decrease in revenues for the issuers. But also they've been worried about the fraud risk, right? Whether it's just like I mentioned earlier, whether it's friendly fraud or whether it's organized crime that tries to generate some more fraud. The flip side is a lot of the issuers, especially maybe less so in the US partly, but for sure in geographies like Australia or UK or France or others, I've seen huge increase in contactless volume. Now you could argue that that's maybe less relevant for airlines, but you'll see later on that some of the limits have been increased dramatically, which makes maybe contactless a bit more relevant for airline spend that it might have been before. But at least some of the issues, the loss that they had on travel spend on their cards has been a bit offset by the increase, offset by the increase in e-commerce, in general e-commerce, or in face-to-face via contactless. When we speak to issuers, the big topic for them right now, the really hot topic, is what they call, people use different names, right? Tokenized cards or digital issuance of virtual cards. So here the idea is, if I have a new customer, or if the card has expired and I need to provide a new card to my existing customer, with the COVID-19, quite often it was a nightmare, right? So how do you get these cards delivered, or how do you get your customers to pick them up? They cannot go to the branch anymore. So the idea increasingly is, as an issuer, both for my new customers and for my existing customers, can I basically provide them with a card number that is virtual, so they don't need a plastic card anymore. And either they use this virtual number directly themselves on a website, for instance, to buy an airline ticket or whatever, or it gets provisioned into the wallet that they want to use automatically. It could be Google Pay, it could be Apple Pay. There's a lot of interest in basically going away, or basically adding. I don't think that plastic cards will disappear overnight, but for sure this digital issuance is a hot topic. And the other topics for issuers, of course, is we get a lot of questions about, what's the future of the airline co-brand card programs, and if we revamp them, what does that mean, right? Is it just some incremental changes to make sure they remain relevant to consumers? Because there's, of course, huge spend that is a revenue for the issuer, and it's, of course, a huge revenue for the airlines that sell the miles to the card issuers. So I suspect that that's going to be, we could only put one item in bold on for each one of the stakeholders, but I assume that for the issuer that are involved in co-brand card, that would be, you could argue, even the number one hot topic. Migration to contactless will carry on to be a focus. That's definitely, if cards are not enabled in contactless yet, issuers are increasingly looking at doing it, both for the pure benefit of getting spend and interchange on these transactions, but also for the the PR value of being able to say, look, we're doing our bit to help with COVID-19 to make sure that customers don't need to touch paper or don't need to put their finger onto the keypad anymore. So the issuers, I believe, are going to be pretty busy over the coming months on this topic. Finally, the card schemes. I think what's going to be relevant there, or what I can, in the short term, what we've seen already, is the card schemes have been pretty flexible in some cases in terms of either revising fees or rules or holding off some changes. So I know you had presentations recently by Visa and MasterCard, so you've seen some of the updates have been delayed, or here's the example of what Amex is doing for its cardholders as well, to make sure that they have as much financial relief as they can get. We'll talk later on about the examples of the increase in contactless limits to really help. Again, this is maybe less relevant for the airlines, but for sure to help face-to-face transactions with contactless cards or mobiles. And we know that card schemes have been talking to ARC and IATA and others to see what can be done to to really make sure that they can do whatever helps in the short term. In the long term, just like the issuers, card schemes are very focused on virtual card issuance as well. You've seen some announcements like what Visa announced with ConfirmAPay, or they're there to also support their issuers that want to go more towards virtual card issuance. You've seen some announcements about extending partnerships. So recently there was this partnership, for instance, between MasterCard and Samsung Money in the US market. And the other big question mark is, could there be some new card schemes, that could be set up? So we've seen that over the past years recently, like in Turkey, that has a new domestic card network. And in Europe right now, as you might know, there's it's not a project yet, but it's a group of banks that are looking at the so-called EPI initiative, and they will decide next month if they proceed with setting up basically a EU governed card scheme for the Eurozone. So it might never happen, or it might happen. We'll know that next month. So again, that is much more for long-term perspective, because even if they were to to do it, it would take years and not months. So I've been talking a lot, and I can't see people, so I don't know whether people are nodding their head or not. But maybe I can stop here to see if there's any questions, comments, agreement, disagreements with any of these consequences we're seeing on each stakeholder.
So I do have a couple of questions here. Pascal, have you talked to airlines agents who are experiencing an increase in interchange prices that have occurred since the crisis started?
So any increase in interchange that they're paying?
Yes.
Yes. Well, to be honest, I mean, unfortunately, most airlines or agents have very small sales right now, right? So it's it's not much. It's really sad, but there's not much revenue coming in. And I'm not hearing that there's more issue about downgrades, for instance, than before. But we're getting a lot of questions about the virtual card, and we'll talk about that later on. To be honest, less in the US, more in other geographies, about the whole equation of, is it an increase in cost versus what extra value or revenue do I get as an airline? So if you don't mind, Jennifer, on that topic, maybe we'll wait until we talk about that slide on virtual cards, and then I can share a view. But I'm not hearing if the question is around downgrades or if I need interchange fees. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this question I just wasn't clear on, so maybe they'll clarify. There's a question about chargebacks. I don't know if you're going to get into chargebacks more later, Pascal.
What's
really,
the question?
It's around seeing an increase in chargebacks where services were provided, and what merchants can do to better handle those chargebacks with their acquirers.
Yeah, no, I don't know if that refers to the scenario where the service is provided, and then the consumer is trying a chargeback to kind of get some money back just because they have financial difficulties, and they try to basically to do it for fraudulent reason, which you could argue this is more so-called friendly fraud or first-party fraud, if that's what it refers to. I'm not sure I've seen different practices from what airlines do today anyway. Typically most airlines I come across try to work very closely with their acquirers as well to see if to make sure that they respond in a timely manner. And that's been the challenge, right? Because if some staff have been furloughed, or some airlines still have some very manual processes to handle chargebacks, the concerns they have is not so much do I need a different process, is just do I have enough manpower to be able to dispute this chargeback and provide the compelling evidence quickly enough, not to miss the deadlines. So that's some concern I've heard, and some maybe even more so on the acquirer to help them during the period of crisis. But to be honest, it's not it hasn't raised as a hot topic right now. It's just one of the many topics we're hearing.
Okay, I've got another question. So you talked about a possible new European card scheme. Do you think they'll work like other cards, or do you think it would be linked to an instant bank transfer type payment?
Okay, that's a very good question. To be honest, we could spend 2 hours on that. I'll give you the short answer, and then again, it could be science fiction. Maybe it won't happen, but the project is looking at 2 products. One product will be a card that the customer would have in the hand, and the other product would be more like a mobile app, where it would be maybe QR code or some other mechanism. And the idea is that there would be, in Europe, there's something called SEPA Create Transfer Inst, which is a push ACH, a push bank transfer in real time. And for the card product, it would be a real-time bank transfer from the issuer to the acquirer. So the card product would still have an issuer, there would still be an acquirer. It's just between the two. It would be a real-time bank transfer. For the second product, which is likely to be mobile-based, for those of you that know it, it's a bit like Ideal in the Netherlands. There would be a SCT Inst, a real-time bank transfer from the bank account of the consumer, either directly to the merchant's bank account or to the merchant's acquirer's bank account. So these are, I think, the 2 products that they are looking at. And let's maybe catch up in early July. That's when we understand they will make a decision. And then we can see if it's going to happen or not and exactly what the product is. But the idea is potentially to leverage this instant bank transfer as the foundation for this new European payment scheme.
So, question about installment payments, and they could have subsidized rate is our sales.
Okay. The second answer is easier. The answer is yes. It's lifting sales, but as always, it's not black and white. It depends, right? So it depends on the country. It depends on the customer segment, on the size of the fare. So after this call, I can maybe share some data. Especially if you look at e-commerce in general, there's some fairly robust A/B testing that has been done by some of our clients in other sectors, where you can see that it can have an impact. But again, as I said, not for all consumers and not for all countries. So it's yes, but it depends. On the first topic, can they be more expensive? Yes, but again, it's a commercial decision, right? As a merchant, either you make it for free, so you tell the consumer, take the price of the ticket, divide by 6, and pay me over 6 months, and there's no interest or no fee, and then you bear the cost, and then it's going to be more expensive, or you get the cost borne by the consumer. Again, commercial decision, and in some markets, charging fees is acceptable. In some other markets, it's not. So this is very, I would say, very market specific. So, for instance, in my home market in France, it's very typical in e-commerce to provide what they call split payment over 3 months. So buy now and pay over 3 monthly installments, and that is more or less always for free. But if it's more than 3 months, then typically there might be a fee. So again, each market is different.
I have a question raised by Paula. Paula, I'm going to open up your mic. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Pascal. This is a great compilation of information. Thank you. On the former slide, you had for merchants alternative payment models. Can you expand on what that is?
Hey, Paula, good to speak with you again. Yes, can you maybe just hold on like 5 minutes, because I've got my next slides are all about that, because I knew you'd be. So that's a great segue into the next section. Thank you. Thank you for the question. So
I think we should go on then.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, because we have to finish at the hour. So actually, we have our first poll question here. So this is a question for you in the audience. So we wanted to know, out of what I've shown you, if you can tell us, what do you think is going to be the biggest change? So is it going to be, for instance, a form of payment like installment? Is it going to be your relationship between you as an airline and your acquirer? Or number three, is it the relationship between you and your agents as an airline, or between you and your issuer, or really no change at all? You think it's going to be business as usual? So if you could reply, and I'll wait until maybe another 5-10 seconds to give a chance to most of you to vote, and then we'll show you the results, and then we'll move on because we only have about 25 minutes left, and I want to make sure we respond to Paula's question about these alternative payment models. So I think I can see that nearly half of you have voted. So maybe a final 2 seconds, and if you could maybe show the result, and then we'll comment them very quickly. So that's interesting. Okay, so it's equally split, but if you take the top two, you see a lot of changes in your relationship between your agents and airlines, and that's, I guess, consistent with what we're seeing as well. A lot of interest from agents to use virtual cards to pay out suppliers like hotels and airlines, and the adoption of alternative forms of payment, especially installment. That doesn't surprise me. Yes, so it's good to know that hopefully you see what we presented as some of the key changes. So thank you for your vote. So if you carry on to the next section, what are some of the new trends we're seeing, including some of these alternative payment models? So here, I'm not going to spend too much time here across these 4 trends because we don't have enough time. But make it very simple, right? Consumers expect more and more digital. They don't want paper. They don't want manual process. In terms of digital innovation, we talked about mobile apps, we talked about contactless, and we talked about real-time bank transfers, regulations. This must keep you busy, right? Each country, I mean, I just gave the example of what India is doing, what the UK is doing, what Europe is doing with SCA. I think you've seen this week, they just announced that there's not going to be any extra delay for SCA in Europe, unlike the UK. The UK has given a delay until September of 2021 for the implementation of Strong Customer Authentication. And in terms of new entrants, there are a lot of them. But let me show you some real examples for each one of these 4 trends, rather than staying theoretical. So on the first one, how do you handle the changes in consumer expectations? So these are examples of some airlines. Again, I don't have shares in any of these airlines. I don't try to say that they are better than anybody else. These are just illustrative examples. But if you look at Emirates or Qatar or the Greek airline, I think a lot of you are thinking about, well, could I maybe reassure travelers by giving them more flexibility, right? So what about if I give them the ability to hold the booking now, either for free, or maybe I charge the card maybe $10 or whatever amount it is, X dollars, and I tell them that they can keep that booking open for 2 days, 10 days, 14 days. So that's something that'd be interesting to see if some of you are looking at doing that or not. But as you can tell here, quite a few airlines are looking at that already, and payment can be an enabler, right? Because if you want to make it easy, you'd ideally ask them for the card, maybe charge them the 10, 20, whatever, $50 it is to hold the booking. And when it comes to paying the fare, you don't want them to re-enter the whole card again, right? So ideally, you do that with some kind of card on file or some kind of mechanism to make it super easy once they decide to proceed to proceed with the booking. So for me, this is a real example where you, as a payment manager or as a payment team, can really enable that if that's what your airline wants to do. Another example, and this is super intriguing for me, I'd love to get your feedback, guys, on that, is the economy as a whole is really moving from a purchase economy to a subscription. Think about it. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you maybe bought a DVD. Now you pay a subscription to Netflix, right? Before, maybe you bought your car. Now you rent your car long term. So could the same happen with flying, right? I mean, United has subscription for some services. You have the example of Volaris. Here I put the example of La Compagnie, an airline that flies between Paris and the US. So, could we move to either a prepaid model where you charge, X thousand and then the customer draws down against that prepaid amount, or to a subscription model where they pay, X dollars per month for 1 or 2 flights per month. And again, payment would really be an enabler for that, because if you go into recurring payments, you need, of course, to have the card on file. You need to be able to handle the card and make it as seamless as possible, so you don't get customers to really question whether they should every time keep the subscription or not. So that will be very interesting to see if that. And I know when I speak to airlines, I know a lot of you are at least thinking about it and see where it would make sense. Another example is a lot of you are trying to actually proactively push vouchers, right? Here's the example of Etihad that's saying that during a promotional period, if you buy a travel voucher for $100 right now, they'll add for free 50% to the value of the voucher. So you pay 100, but really you get value worth 150. And you can use that voucher for the next, I think, year or 2 years. Again, everybody does it differently, but that's a way, of course, for you to get cash up front and to tell the customer, look, we give you all this extra value, for you to fly with us over the next year or 2, or however. I think in this case the voucher is valid for for a couple of years. That's another example. Contactless, as I said, is potentially becoming increasingly relevant for you now. Historically, contactless, especially when you pay by card, was limited maybe at, in the UK, I think initially it was £25. In France, it was €30. So, this is too low to be relevant for most cases paying for an airline ticket. But you have airlines like Air Asia. Here they're looking at enabling here at airports for a number of use cases. But if you really look at what Visa and MasterCard have done, or the local schemes, the contactless limit has really increased a lot. So the case in point is, look, for instance, at Australia. During the COVID-19, the contactless limit increased to $200. So that starts getting high enough that potentially it could be relevant for, if not the main plane ticket, maybe some other ancillary fees you might charge to to consumers in case they go to a city office, an airport office, or to another physical location or self-service kiosk. So I think the more this kind of contactless limits rise, the more they might become relevant for the airline sector, and for sure they're really relevant in traditional commerce. For NDC, that'll be a big question for all of you guys. Is COVID-19 going to increase the pickup of NDC or not? If it enables a direct relationship and rich content to be pushed from the airline to the agent, is it going to pick up maybe more than what Ayata had forecasted here on this slide? And if yes, have we set up our payment processes and our payment contracts and our fraud prevention rules or ADM rules in a way that can handle NDC transactions? So I'm leaving that as a question, because again, it's maybe early days to tell which way the crisis is going to have an impact or not on that topic. So these are just some examples of some early trends of what we're seeing airlines to do, partly or mostly as a reaction to to COVID-19. And here we thought we ask you a second poll. You've seen all these changes. The general trend is really to say that especially consumers want to go to more and more digital, right? They don't want to pay by check, by paper. What does that mean for you as an airline? Do you have a major digital transformation project internally, or was that even kicked off as part of COVID, or are you only making some small incremental changes, or do you really believe that there's no change needed? It's really business as usual. So it'd be good again if we could get as many votes as possible, to see how our airlines. And to be honest, I think there are other people than just airlines on this call. But for your own company, whether you really see that as a massive structural change or more as an incremental change. And then we have about just short of half of you that have voted, so maybe another 5 seconds. to make sure we have enough respondents to be hopefully representative. So can we please see the results? Oops. There we are. Okay, so it's half-half. Okay, so a very small minority see no change, but most of you are working on a major change or incremental. Okay, well, thanks for that. So the other discussion we wanted to show is the impact of regulation and how airlines are responding. So what we're seeing is that a very hot topic, and I know it's more European, but does impact US headquartered airlines as well, is around strong customer authentication. I'm sure most of you now know that in the UK, the deadline has been pushed by 6 months to September of next year. But for the rest of Europe, it looks like it's not going to change. It's going to be January, which really means that I know a lot of you are scratching their head by saying, look, it was already a challenge before, at least for my direct sales, even more so for my indirect sales. And now if I have staff furloughed, it's going to be even more of a challenge. So unfortunately, I'm not sure I've got much good news there, because I think that's going to be a challenge for the industry. We see in terms of new entrants, as I said, we see a lot of interest in installment. Again, I don't have any shares in that business. This is just an example. But here you have a company that raised quite a lot of funds later. I believe they're based in the UK, if I remember, which is what it's shown in the pounds. But it's one of the multiple providers that can enable installment for airlines, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be a hot topic on many of your plates. And then the key decision is where do you enable it, and with which provider, and is it for free to the consumer, or do you pay for it? So quite a lot of business cases and potential RFPs, I assume, that you guys will be doing in the coming weeks or coming months. Another example, when I talked about escrow account, and again, here, this is just an example. I don't mean to advise you to necessarily choose that company, but some of the acquirers we're talking to, whether they're keen to start developing relationship with airlines, or maybe they already have airlines as merchants, are looking at making some changes to the settlement cycle and potentially leveraging an escrow account, whereby the funds would be paid to the airline X days before departure, and the X could vary fairly dynamically based on but the funds could be put into an account that either could be potentially, and again, I'm not a legal expert, but could still be in the name of the merchant. So that might be helping you in terms of your financial reporting and your balance sheet. And I was even wondering if it could be turned into a customer benefit, right? So if that's imposed to you as an airline by your acquirer, is that something that becomes even something you could make clear to the consumer by saying, look, don't worry, your funds are safeguarded in this trust account. So could that maybe help with some of the reassurance that we want to provide to consumers to make sure that they start booking as soon as possible? Again, I know that there is some very strong views about the plus and minuses of this kind of approach. It'd be great to get your to maybe debate that later on. So here we have another poll question. We've seen some of these alternative models we talked about. It'd be interesting to see in the airline sector. Could it be subscription? Could it be charging the traveler at a different time? It'd be great to see if you can share your views. And again, this is just speculation, right? So we're not preempting what you guys are doing, and it's a commercial decision that each airline needs to make. But it'd be interesting to get your view on what might be adopted by this industry. Few of you are voting with the of the participants vote on this question. I think we're nearly there, and I think the numbers are quite static. So can we maybe show the results? Okay, thank you. So interesting. Okay, so half of you are either maybe looking at or intrigued by this migration to a subscription model or to a prepaid model. So that seems to be definitely, to be honest, personally, that's what I find very intriguing as well. And I know there's quite a few discussion to maybe look at these kind of changes. It could be a very big change for the industry, and we'll have to see if consumers really want to go that way or not. So that, I think, will make for fascinating discussions over the coming months. So just conscious of time, we can maybe go to the next section. Before we go there, let me ask Jennifer or Kevin if there's any quick question you want me to tackle. I only have 2 more slides. So
yeah, I do not have any more right now. No, I'm good.
And nobody's raised their hand.
Okay, great. It sounds like everybody's still awake by looking at the fact that you're voting for these poll questions. So that's good to see. My final slide is what can you do about it? So again, here I'm not trying to recommend anything, but just give you some ideas. Some of them we discussed already, and typically, when we talk to airlines about what is it that where do you want to prioritize your time, we put that into 4 buckets, right? So it's common sense, right? What can you do to potentially reduce your cost if that's your priority? Now, here, if you take the first one, the virtual card, the fact that agents may increasingly want to use virtual cards. To be honest, that's the one that's it's hard to put that into a bucket because it's partly a cost discussion. You have to decide as an airline if you want to absorb the cost of accepting these virtual cards that are used by agents. But you could argue it could also be on the revenue side, right? So if you accept these virtual cards, does that help you or not foster a better relationship with your key OTAs, for instance? And does that help you get incremental revenues? That to me is a key question that if as an airline you haven't asked yourself that question yet, I believe that this in the coming weeks or coming months should be one of your top priorities. Really, and I think the answer is different for each airline. Most likely the answer is maybe different by country or by channel or by agent. But in any case, it's likely to require your treasury folks, your finance folks, your distribution colleagues to get in a room together and come up with a process to come to a policy, and then of course update your ADM policy as well and so on. So I believe that out of the that long list of what you could be doing, that's most likely one of them. If I had to highlight one in the second bucket, what you can do to protect your revenues, it'll be the first one, the reduction in decline rate. This is less of an issue, of course, if you are US headquartered, you use a big US acquirer and you have domestic sales. Most unlikely, I'm sure you've optimized your card authorization rate already. But as soon as you go into international sales, especially in markets where the card issuers might really are more likely to decline if they see an incoming transaction that's maybe cross-border, for instance. That's typically, at least you need to look at it. And I know some of you have not even looked at it yet, to really look at what are your decline rates by the issuance country. I would really suggest you do this analysis as an input into, are we happy with the setup we have, or do we need to look at maybe local acquiring in some cases? I think that's really a topic that if you haven't done it yet, most likely there's something to be gained there. In terms of the third bucket, the additional revenues, I'm sure one of your priorities is going to be your co-brand card. Now that's maybe not the people on this call that are looking at it. Maybe it's your colleagues in marketing or distribution or whatever. But it's likely that these co-brand cards might need to be revamped or relaunched, or just make sure that they remain relevant. I think that's going to be a key focus. And in terms of protecting your cash flow, which is more of a balance sheet item, the other 3 are more P&L items. Here, this is more or less, for a lot of you, it's a new field, right? A lot of you maybe haven't had, either to have recently discussions about, holdbacks with the acquirers, or do I spread my volume maybe across more acquirers, so that I'm less dependent maybe on one, but then I might lose some of my operational efficiencies if I increase my number of acquirers. So all of these discussions about what can you do to protect cash flow, maybe avoid holdbacks or delay in settlement, definitely I believe would be a top priority for for the coming months for all of you. Another suggestion, we have a suggestion about how you can go about that. But before we do that, maybe we do the final poll, and then that should still give us 2 or 3 minutes to talk. So as a payment team, I assume most of you on this call are part of the payment team of an airline. If you had to select one priority for the next year, for the next 6 to 12 months, what is it? Is it still mostly operational stuff like handling refunds, or are you really focused on reducing your cost of acceptance, or are you really focused on enabling things like installment to really help your airline kickstart sales? Or is it around your relationship with acquirers or payment gateways and adding new acquirers or changing acquirers? So if you can share what your priority is, and then it'll be great to to see what it is. Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, so most of you are still, I would say, nearly half are still in more or less survival mode. Handle the refunds and things like that. And that's maybe not surprising, because especially for airlines that have furloughed staff, there's a lot to do and fewer people. I'm not surprised that none of you are looking at changing acquirers right now, because even though you might consider that maybe next year, of course, when it's a time of crisis, that's maybe not the ideal time to engage into discussion with a new partner. And then the rest between reducing costs and increasing revenue, bit of a split. It'd be fascinating. I don't know, Jennifer, if you can have a similar call or later on this year after the summer to see, once we get into a more, hopefully business as usual, whether we'll have more priority on payment cost or leveraging payments to help revenues. But let's see that when we get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my final slide, and I'll be just 1 minute, is what we suggest airlines to do. A bit of a consulting approach. We're consultants after all, but either you can do that with us or you do it yourself. But I know some of you have not done that yet. So at first, you really need to do a diagnostic of your payment function, whether it's your contracts, your process, and maybe you don't have time to do that right now internally. So maybe you can look at people like us to help you do that. Number 2, once you've done this diagnostic, what's your roadmap? So should you add installment now, or does it require first a new gateway, or should you do surcharging first? So it's really helping you prioritize and sequencing what you need to do. And then phase 3 is, of course, the doing, right? It's issuing the RFPs and getting the the new products or the new functionalities in place. And to finish on that slide, just wanted to leave you my email address. So as you can tell, we love talking about all these topics, and hopefully some of them will be good news for the people on this call related to payments in the travel sector. So if I spoke too fast, or if you have questions, or if the French accent was too confusing, just email me and be happy to set up a call. We've been focused as a consulting firm on travel payments since 2002. As Jennifer said, I think I more or less met Jennifer around that time, so it feels like a long time, but we all learn, to be honest, each day, and there's a lot of change right now, so I think we can learn from each other. So it'd be great to hear from you. So let me stop here and see if there's any final questions or not, and then I think we're going to have to close off more or less soon anyway. But Jennifer, maybe over to you.
Sure. Yeah, we have we tend to run a little bit long. We try to be flexible around these things. So I think we have a few more minutes, and I just have a few questions here. Here's a good one about, it was interesting to me that the prepaid came up as one of the top focuses for following this COVID crisis. And so the question is, would that model apply equally to corporate as well as personal travel, do you think?
That's a great question. And if I can expand that question, I'm getting also questions about any changes in payments, right? So I'm getting a lot of questions about, will corporates be more likely to move to something else, or consumers? I'll give you my personal viewpoint, and it's limited value because I don't have a crystal ball. But if you look at B2B in general outside of travel, you definitely see a lot of changes there in terms of whether it's leveraging instant payment rails, whether it's prepaid or changes, especially when you have two partners that have an existing contract. So I know a lot of airlines have private fare arrangements with their very large corporate customers. So if you have these kind of contracts, you would assume that that's where things can change because you have a contract in place and you know who you're talking to, and this is big volume. So that could be maybe one area where it could change. On the leisure side, maybe with frequent flyers, if they have an account with you, you could argue they have an account with you already, and the miles that you have put into the flyer accounts, in a way, it's prepaid value already, right? It's value that they have, it's miles that they have to spend on you. So could that be expanded into a kind of a prepaid account? Maybe as well. So I think the two areas I would look at are corporations where the airlines has a contract with, and consumers where you have a frequent flyer program relationship with, and that's maybe the two segments I would focus on.
Okay, great. So since MasterCard has some new wholesale rates for their virtual card programs, do you anticipate higher adoption by airlines?
That's a 64,
within the agency?
That's a $64,000 question, or whatever the expression is, right?
Yeah.
It's, again, I'm sorry to say, it depends, because I think some airlines for sure will revise their virtual card policy, going both ways, right? There's some trends that push the adoption up, and there's some trends that push the adoption down. So airlines that are really keen to sell, and maybe they open up new markets, new routes, and really rely on agents. I think they're going to have a hard look here. Should I maybe start accepting virtual cards now? But on the flip side, the downward trend is a lot of airlines, as we've seen, are really cost focused, right? And are going to ask some really hard questions. But at least what MasterCard, I guess, is doing is by giving flexibility, you would assume that it gives a framework for the airline to talk to the issuer and also talk to the agent, to come to some kind of balance equilibrium. But I believe that that's going to be a very active part of the market going forward. So if as an airline, if you're not looking at it, or if you don't have people tasked to really work out what you need to do, that would be one of my first priorities when I get back to the office tomorrow, is to really have your finance, maybe revenue accounting as well, to really, maybe you need our help as well, or whoever's help, to really come up with that policy. I think this is a key question.
Yep, I agree. I agree. It is a hot topic for sure. It always is. We need dollars more, I guess.
So Jennifer, can you repeat the question to make what more relevant?
Yeah, co-brand cards.
Okay.
What needs to be done to make co-brand cards more relevant?
Well, we do a lot of work for issuers as well, and the overall trend is all about personalization, customization. Call it what you want, right? Making the customer relevant for a segment of one. So I think, to be honest, both airlines and issuers, I don't think have leveraged enough all the data that you have about your customers, and it's really mining that data, ideally in an automated manner, using machine learning or artificial intelligence, so that when you make offers that are relevant, even the product itself, to make it relevant just for Jennifer, and it's going to be a different product for Kevin and a different one for Judy. So I think this customization is really going to be key, and that we see that in the card market overall, and that's one of the changes I would expect to see with core brands as well.
Sounds good. I think that's all the questions I have. Kevin, do you have anyone raising their hand?
No one's raised their hand.
Okay. Good. Well, Jennifer, thanks again for giving me the opportunity to present. I really enjoyed doing this webinar, and happy to follow up if there's any other questions or any requests. Will be available.
Excellent. Let me just wrap up here. So first of all, I want to thank Pascal for joining us today, and lots of great information. Really appreciate that. I know a lot of work goes into putting these presentations together, and you've got some great content there, so thank you. So next, this afternoon, actually at noon Eastern time, we have Discover here to share with us the changes that are going on in their world. Thank you everyone for participating, your active participation. The poll questions were great. It was great to get your responses. Really appreciate that. And I guess we'll hope to see you on the next session. And if not that one, Kevin Haag and I are presenting tomorrow at noon. So thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.